The rotor blades were still screaming when the helicopter lifted off the ground. I was waving both arms, blood soaking through my left sleeve, screaming into the smoke-thick air until my throat felt raw. My legs nearly gave out beneath me, but I kept waving. They saw us. They left anyway. Fall back. My uncle's voice crackled through my earpiece. His tone was calm, almost bored, like he was ordering coffee, not abandoning his own soldiers on a burning battlefield. Sir, we're still here. I screamed into the radio. We're still in the hot zone. Silence. Then static. Behind me, gunfire tore through what was left of the wall we were sheltering against. My squad looked at me, 6 pairs of eyes wide with panic, searching my face for answers I didn't have. In that moment, I understood something that turned my blood cold. My uncle hadn't forgotten us. He had chosen to leave us. My name is Riley Croft. And that night, my own family decided I was expendable. We were outnumbered, cut off, and bleeding. For soldiers still able to stand. 2 wounded but moving. No commander. No backup. Just us, the darkness, and the sound of gunfire drawing closer. I took command because no one else would. We moved through that collapsed structure to the left, I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. We stay low. We stay quiet. We bring everyone out. No one gets left behind. I said that last part on purpose. We moved fast and careful through the rubble, ducking under broken beams, pressing against crumbling walls. Corporal Hayes stayed on my right side. Private Donovan carried the wounded man on his back without a single complaint. We were bleeding, terrified, and running on nothing but willpower, but we kept moving forward. Then Hayes asked the one question no one else had said out loud yet. Why didn't he come back for us? I didn't answer. Because I already knew. And knowing it hurt far worse than any bullet wound I had ever felt in my life. We almost made it to the extraction point. Almost. The shot came out of nowhere. One moment Private Ellis was right behind me, keeping pace, breathing hard. The next moment he wasn't. I spun around and dropped to my knees beside him before my mind had caught up with what my eyes were seeing. He was the youngest person in our squad. 19 years old. He kept a photograph of his little sister tucked inside the front pocket of his vest. He had shown it to me 2 days before, grinning like it was the most important thing he owned. I pressed my hands against his chest and talked to him and told him to stay with me. I meant every word I said. His eyes found mine. His voice came out barely above a whisper. You said we wouldn't be left. He was gone before I could answer. I knelt in the dirt and the smoke, and something broke apart quietly inside me. I had made them believe in a promise that was already broken before I ever made it. And now I had to carry that for the rest of my life. A unit from the eastern base found us 3 hours later. They handed us water and got us moving and didn't ask many questions, which told me they already knew something I wasn't supposed to know yet. Back at base, my uncle, Commander Gerald Wade, was waiting. He stood straight and relaxed, arms folded, looking exactly like a man who had done nothing wrong. He gave us a tight nod, as though we had simply been late returning from a routine drill. You disobeyed direct orders, he said to me. His voice was flat and cold. I stared at him. You left us, sir. He took one step forward and dropped his voice so only I could hear. Be very careful about what story you think you're telling, Riley. He held my gaze for a long moment, then walked away without another word. I stood completely still, because I understood exactly what that meant. He wasn't defending himself. He was warning me. He was already rewriting the story, and he had started long before we ever got back. I called my mother that night from a satellite phone in the corner of the barracks. I was still shaking, still covered in dust. I just needed her voice. I needed her to tell me that what happened was wrong. She let me talk. She let me get through all of it, the helicopter, the gunfire, the radio silence, Ellis. When I finished, the line went quiet. Then she said, barely above a whisper, Riley, please don't make trouble for your uncle. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Mom, he abandoned us. Someone died. She sighed. He has done so much for this family. Just be careful what you say out loud. I couldn't speak. An hour later, a text came through from my brother Kevin. Short and sharp, the way he always wrote when he had already made his mind up about something. Don't ruin his career over your own mistake. That was when I understood completely. My family had already chosen a side. They had chosen it before they even heard my version. They had chosen it probably before I even landed back on base. And they had chosen the man who left me to die over there in the dark. The official report came out 4 days later. I read it standing at my bunk, thinking maybe seeing the facts on paper would make something feel more solid. I was wrong. The report stated that I had led an unauthorized tactical move that compromised the mission. It said my squad had acted recklessly and against direct orders. It said Commander Wade had made a difficult but necessary withdrawal to preserve the remaining forces under his command. It said Private Ellis had died as a result of my decisions. I read it 3 times. Then I read it a 4th time slower, going line by line, searching for something true. The room felt very small. My hands were steady, but everything inside me was shaking. They had flipped the entire story upside down. I was the reckless one. Gerald Wade was the commander who had made the hard call. Ellis was dead because of me. But then I remembered something. Something I had almost forgotten in the chaos of the past 4 days. I had been wearing my helmet cam that night. I dug through my gear bag with shaking hands, pulling out equipment I hadn't touched since I got back. Spare batteries. A folded map. A radio clip. Then I found it. My helmet cam. The casing was cracked along the left side and the lens was scorched from heat, but the unit itself was intact. My heart was pounding as I plugged it into my laptop and waited. The power light blinked on. I let out a slow breath. But when I opened the footage files, my stomach dropped hard. Large sections were corrupted, jumping from one timestamp to the next with whole windows of time missing in between. The most critical part, the minutes surrounding the extraction call, the moment my uncle gave the order to leave us, was completely gone. Everything else was there in broken pieces. But the moment that proved what really happened had been wiped clean. I sat back and stared at the ceiling above my bunk. Having the truth inside my head was not enough. I needed proof that other people could see and hear. And the most important proof had been taken from me before I ever thought to fight for it. 2 days after the report was released, I was called into the office of Senior Officer Colonel Henry Briggs. He had a clean desk and a quiet room, and the kind of stillness that made you feel something dangerous was sitting just underneath the surface. He slid a manila folder across the desk without saying a word. I opened it. Inside were disciplinary notes with my name on them. 3 separate incidents, all documented in official language. All completely fabricated. Dates I could fully account for. Places I had never been. "Let this go," he said simply. "Walk away and move forward." I looked up from the folder. "These aren't real." He didn't blink. "Push this any further and your career ends. That folder goes into your permanent file." He let that land. "I'm giving you a chance to be smart about this." I stood up slowly, picked up my cap. I walked out of that office without saying another word. Because now I understood something that changed the shape of everything. This was not just about my uncle making a terrible decision in the field. This went further up than Gerald Wade. This involved people with enough power to fabricate files and make them stick. 2 weeks after we returned, the base held a formal recognition ceremony. I found out about it the morning it happened through a notice on the barracks board. Commander Gerald Wade was being honored for outstanding leadership under pressure. There was a medal, a speech, photographs. I stood at the far edge of the crowd where no one would notice me and watched the whole thing happen. My family had flown in for the occasion. My mother stood in the front row in her best coat, hands clasped, glowing with pride. My grandmother was beside her, pressing a handkerchief to her eyes. My brother Kevin stood straight and tall, smiling wide. My uncle stepped up to receive his medal. He shook hands. He smiled for the cameras. He spoke humbly about sacrifice and protecting his people. I stood alone at the back, completely invisible to every person I had grown up trusting. The man who had given the order to leave us had just been celebrated as someone who would never do such a thing. And my own family had cheered the loudest of anyone in that crowd. I was in the equipment room alone 3 days after the ceremony when someone stepped in quietly behind me. I turned fast, my nerves still raw from everything. It was a young tech specialist I had seen around the base but never spoken to directly. He was slim and careful-looking with steady eyes. He glanced at the door before he spoke. "I heard what happened out there," he said quietly. "Not the official version. The real one. His name was Rowan. He worked in digital recovery, corrupted drives, damaged data, lost footage. He told me he had heard through base channels that my helmet cam footage was incomplete and mostly unusable. Bring it to me, he said. I can't make promises, but I might be able to pull something out of it. Hope flickered inside me for the first time since I had been back. Small and fragile, but there. You should know something, he added, his voice dropping lower. If someone already went in and wiped pieces of that footage, they will come for it again the moment they realize you're still looking. Just like that, I wasn't only fighting for the truth. I was now also responsible for protecting it before it disappeared completely. I gave Rowan the cam that same evening, along with a copy I had saved onto a small backup drive. Splitting the evidence felt like the right instinct. It turned out to be the only decision that saved everything. 3 days later, I came back to my locker between drills and found the door forced open. The hinges were bent inward. The lock had been broken clean through. Everything inside had been gone through, and my gear bag was missing. The spare files I had stored inside it were gone. My stomach dropped straight to the floor. Then I steadied myself. Because the helmet cam was with Rowan. The backup drive was with Rowan. And nobody who wanted this story buried knew that yet. I filed an official report about the break-in, knowing full well that nothing would come of it. Then I went straight to Rowan and told him exactly what had happened. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said very carefully, "They're getting nervous now, which means we're getting close to something they're genuinely afraid of." He knocked on my apartment door on a Thursday evening, 3 slow, deliberate knocks, like a man who believed he still had every right to stand there. Commander Gerald Wade, my uncle, standing in the hallway in civilian clothes, no uniform, no rank on his collar. Just a man trying very hard to look like family paying a simple visit. "You're spiraling," he said quietly when I opened the door. His voice was soft and careful, the tone he always used when he wanted something from you. "Let me fix this before it goes any further." I almost laughed out loud. "You've already done enough fixing." Something shifted behind his eyes. The softness dropped away for just a second. "You don't understand how big this is," he said. "What you're chasing. It goes places you really don't want to go, Riley." I held his gaze without moving. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you left us in that field." He stared at me for a long moment, then walked away without another word. But I noticed something as he went. His hands were tight at his sides. His jaw was set hard. He wasn't angry at me. He was afraid of me. And those were two very different things. Rowan called me in on a Sunday morning, his voice careful and guarded over the phone. "I've got something. Come now." I was there in 20 minutes. He had footage playing across 2 monitors side by side, walking me through everything he had been able to recover. The squad assembling, the radio traffic, the chaos of incoming fire, the moment we made the extraction call. All of it there, shaky and grainy but completely real. Then the footage cut. A hard jump. A missing window of time. Several clean minutes, gone as precisely as if someone had taken a blade to the file. "This wasn't damage from the field," Rowan said, leaning forward. "Someone went into this file manually and removed this section on purpose." I stared at the gap in the timeline on the screen. Then Rowan held up one finger. "But they weren't careful enough," he said quietly. He pulled up a separate audio file on the second monitor. "They wiped the video completely. But buried deep inside the corrupted data underneath it, I found a fragment of audio, still partially intact." He hovered his finger over the play button and looked at me. "You need to hear this." Rowan pressed play. The audio was rough and broken in places, layered under static and the distant sound of rotor blades spinning. But underneath all of it, a voice cut through clearly enough to make the back of my neck go cold. It was my uncle. "We proceed without them." For words. Calm. Flat. Decided. No hesitation at all in his voice. I stood completely still. The clip was barely 12 seconds from start to finish. The surrounding context was missing. A skilled lawyer could argue it meant something else. Someone clever could try to spin the meaning. It wasn't the full, clean picture I needed to walk into a courtroom. But it was real. It was his voice. It was him giving that order. And it was recorded proof that a decision had been made. Not a mistake, not a miscommunication, not a difficult tactical call made under pressure. A cold, deliberate choice. Rowan saved the file to 3 separate encrypted locations before either of us said another word. It's not enough on its own, he said quietly. I know, I said. But it's enough to make them very nervous. And nervous people always make mistakes eventually. The week after Rowan found the audio clip, things moved fast, and not in my direction. My security clearance was suspended pending review. The official reason given was psychological instability following combat trauma. I found out by reading a memo slid under my barracks door at 6 in the morning. 2 days after that, I was ordered to report to a base counselor for mandatory evaluation. The counselor asked careful questions in a careful tone, and I answered all of them carefully, because I understood exactly what the evaluation was actually for. They were building a paper record. They wanted documentation that I was unstable, unreliable, and too emotional to be taken seriously as a witness. That same evening my mother called me. She was crying. Riley, please, she said. Why are you doing this to all of us? Your uncle is going to lose everything. I thought about Ellis, about his photograph, about the 12 seconds of audio sitting on Rowan's encrypted drive. Mom, I said gently. He already took everything from someone else's family. She hung up without saying another word. It took me a long time to work up the courage to visit Ellis's family. I drove to their house on a Saturday afternoon in early November, 3 months after we returned home. I sat in the car for 10 full minutes before I made myself walk to the front door. His sister Dana answered. She was younger than I expected, maybe 17, with dark circles under her eyes that had probably been there since the day the news came to her door. When she recognized my uniform, her face moved through several emotions all at once. You were with him, she said. Yes. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she asked the only question that mattered to her. Did they leave him? I could have softened it. I could have found careful words. But she deserved the truth more than she deserved comfort. I nodded. She crumpled forward. I caught her before she fell, and we stood in the doorway together for a long time. When she finally pulled back, her eyes held something harder underneath all the grief. Tell the truth, she said quietly. Do it for him. I drove home with her words sitting heavy in my chest, knowing clearly that I had never been fighting just for myself. 2 weeks after I visited Dana, Rowan called me in again. He had been quietly digging through financial records tied to the mission, cross-referencing dates, transfer codes, and communication logs he had carefully pulled access to through channels I chose not to ask too many questions about. What he found made everything darker and much clearer. Offshore payments. 3 of them timed precisely to the weeks surrounding our operation. Large enough to be meaningful, small enough to avoid triggering automatic flags. They traced through 2 separate shell accounts back to a name connected to a private arms supplier operating in the same region where our unit had been deployed. The mission had never been what we were told it was. Our squad had been deliberately positioned in a location connected to a black market deal that collapsed at the last moment. When the deal fell apart, we became the loose end that needed to disappear quietly. Gerald Wade had not panicked under pressure. He had not made a terrible split-second decision in a desperate moment. He had calculated every single part of what he did. He had not abandoned us. He had sacrificed us on purpose. I brought everything to a military defense attorney named Major Warren Finch. He had a small office off base, files covering every flat surface, and a reputation for taking the cases no one else would go near. I laid it all out on his desk. The audio fragment, Rowan's financial records, the fabricated disciplinary notes, Colonel Briggs's warning in his quiet office, the forced locker, my suspended clearance. Finch read through every piece without interrupting once. When he finished, he folded his hands and looked at me directly. This is solid enough to file, he said. But you need to understand what comes next. If we open this formally, your family's involvement becomes part of the public record. Every person protecting your uncle is going to come at you harder than they already have. I didn't hesitate for even a second. They already made their choice, I said. I'm making mine. He filed for a formal military inquiry the following morning. By noon, the request had been accepted. The truth was no longer something I carried alone inside my own head. It was on record now, official, real, and protected by the process. For the first time, I wasn't just a soldier with a story. I was a witness with a case. After the filing became part of the public record, my family cut me off completely within 48 hours. My phone filled up fast with messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Cousins, aunts, old family friends who had watched me grow up and attended my enlistment send-off. The messages all said different versions of the same thing, that I was selfish, dishonest, and tearing apart a good man out of jealousy and wounded pride. My grandmother sent one short message. She said she was ashamed of me. My brother Kevin called once. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't ask for my side of anything. "You're dead to us," he said. Then he hung up. I sat with my phone on the table in front of me and stared at his name on the screen for a long time after the call ended. It hurt. I will not pretend it didn't. These were the people I had grown up alongside, the people I had trusted completely. Losing all of them at once felt like a second kind of abandonment, quieter than the first but just as complete. But it still hurt less than watching that helicopter rise. The formal hearing began on a cold Monday morning in a military courtroom that smelled like wood polish and old air. I arrived early and took my seat beside Major Finch, my back straight, my face still. Commander Gerald Wade entered a few minutes later with his legal team. 2 senior attorneys in press suits who moved like men used to winning. My uncle sat across from me at the opposing table and did not look at me once. Not when he settled into his chair. Not when the panel was introduced. Not when opening statements began. His lead attorney went first and was very good at his job. He described me as a soldier struggling deeply with unprocessed trauma, emotionally compromised, a young woman looking for someone to blame for her own failures in the field. He spoke smoothly and let each sentence settle into the room like it was simply obvious truth. I sat completely still through all of it. Several panel members glanced over at me, watching for a reaction, trying to read my face. I gave them nothing at all, because my turn was coming, and I had been preparing for exactly this moment for months. When Major Finch nodded at me, I stood up. I smoothed my jacket. I turned to face the panel directly, and then I told the story. I told it exactly as it had happened, from the beginning of the operation to the moment the helicopter lifted off and left us on the ground below. I did not raise my voice once. I did not rush through any part. I did not use language designed to make anyone feel sorry for me. I gave them facts in order with every detail I could hold clearly in my memory. Every radio call. Every order given. Every name. I said Ellis's name out loud and clearly. I watched one of the panel members write it down deliberately in their notes. When I finished, the room went completely silent. Nobody moved for a long moment. Major Finch let the silence sit and do its work. Then the opposing attorney rose for cross-examination, picking carefully at small details, suggesting I had been confused by the extreme stress and fear of that night. He was skilled. He almost made me feel uncertain. But I had something waiting that he did not know about yet. The cross-examination had been going for nearly 20 minutes when the courtroom door opened at the back of the room. Rowan walked in quietly and took a seat near the far wall. He carried a slim black case that he set on his lap without drawing anyone's attention. He caught my eye once across the room and gave a small, steady nod. Major Finch stood up. "With the panel's permission, we have a final piece of evidence submitted this morning and cleared for review." The opposing team objected immediately. The panel chair reviewed the submission documentation for 2 full minutes while the room held completely still. Then she allowed it. Rowan connected his case to the monitor at the front of the room. The footage began to play. It was rough and broken in places, but what it showed was unmistakable. The squad on the ground, the extraction call going through clearly on the radio, the helicopter visible above, and then underneath the video, layered in the audio track like something buried and nearly forgotten. A voice that everyone in the room recognized the moment it came through the speakers. My uncle's voice. "We proceed without them." The courtroom changed in the seconds after those 4 words finished playing. I watched it happen in real time. Panel members straightened visibly in their seats. The opposing attorneys exchanged a fast, sharp look. People sitting in the gallery leaned forward. Major Finch stood with his arms folded, completely still, letting the silence do the work he didn't need to do himself. And then, for the first time since I had walked into that room, Commander Gerald Wade looked at me. Really looked at me. Not as a soldier under his command. Not as a subordinate to be managed. Not even as a niece he had once called family. He looked at me like a man watching the ground disappear from under his feet. The panel chair called for order and began directing sharp, direct questions at my uncle. His attorneys tried to interrupt and redirect. The questions kept coming anyway, each one harder and more specific than the last. Gerald Wade's answers grew shorter and less steady with every exchange. The man who had controlled every version of this story for months was losing the room completely. And he knew it. He looked at me one final time across that courtroom. I held his eyes and did not look away. The panel's decision came down 2 hours after the proceedings closed. Commander Gerald Wade was stripped of his command effective immediately. He was given a dishonorable discharge pending criminal investigation into the financial records connected to the mission. Colonel Briggs, the senior officer who had sat across from me with a folder of fabricated notes and told me to walk away quietly, was placed under a separate inquiry of his own. The room did not erupt into anything loud. It went very quiet instead. The particular kind of quiet that falls when something enormous and completely irreversible has just happened and nobody has quite caught up to it yet. My family sat in the gallery behind the defense table. I did not turn to look at them right away. I didn't need to. I could feel the stillness behind me, the specific silence of people who had defended the wrong person for a very long time, and were only now starting to understand what that had cost everyone. My mother moved through the crowd toward me as we filed out, her face pale and tight. I stepped back. Not out of anger. Not to make her feel the weight of it. Just because I was finally completely done carrying things that were never mine to carry. I drove to the cemetery on a quiet afternoon 2 weeks after the verdict. The grass was still damp from an early morning rain. I found Ellis's headstone in the 3rd row from the back and stood in front of it for a long time without saying anything at all. Then I said, I told the truth. The words came out softer than I expected. But they were the only ones that mattered. I built a new life slowly in the months that followed, carefully, the way you build something when you have finally decided it belongs only to you. I left the base. I left the uniform behind. I moved to a small city near the coast and began working with a veterans advocacy group, helping soldiers navigate a system that had nearly swallowed me whole. My family reached out eventually. Some of them. I listened without rushing anything. Gerald Wade faced criminal charges and lost everything he had spent his entire career building and protecting. He had gambled with our lives for money and walked onto that helicopter without looking back. I had told the truth for free. And that, in the end, made every single difference.